Hi everyone and welcome to my Season 24 Firebird Wizard Guide. So this set was reworked in Season 23 and has become one of the best builds in the game, by far the best on the Wizard, and just in general it is an insane powerhouse of a build that will also stay in the meta next season in Season 24. In fact, it will be the strongest speed XP meta, so if you want to farm XP in the most efficient way, Firebirds is the king in 4-man. It is also one of the top 2 or 3 builds in solo XP farming. It is the second best solo pushing build in the game and the best Rift Guardian killer in the game, to the point where you can kill Rift Guardians on GR150 in as little as 5 seconds. Yes, that's right. What you see here is a clip of the live servers Season 23 without the ethereal buffs, and with ethereals you get probably something like a 7 to 8 tier boost next season. And there's also another setup with the Maxroll's lesson, ethereal staff that you can use for even more damage when you're doing speedruns, but at a cost of changing the setup slightly. I believe next season the lowest Paragon solo 150 clears to this build are gonna be around 2.5k, so you can do it quite early, quite quickly, and it will probably be the easiest class to do a solo 150 with. So with this out of the way, let's jump into the setups here. In this D3 planner there are a lot of different setups, but I have updated them all to Season 24 using the ethereal weapons. Most of the time Wizard Spike is the way to go. Gives you 100% extra damage just like the other ethereals, and it also has this up to 100% extra damage stacking effect that works essentially like a Bane Stricken. This will be extremely strong for solo pushing because you don't have a Bane Stricken yourself, so you're gonna kill the boss quickly with this anyway. You're gonna finish off elites very fast with this. And also for 4-man Rift Guardian killing, which is going to be your main job in 4-man groups. You will just obliterate bosses with this. This is extremely strong, and there is another really strong ethereal, which is the Maxroll's lesson here, and this will be used in 4-man speedruns. So if you're already familiar with the setup, here you drop the Orgles set and you use the Firebird shoulders plus Ashnagar, so you actually get some toughness, and then you have the Maxroll for insanely strong hits from your mirror images. In this Firebird build, almost all of the damage done will come from your mirror images. The way this works is that you have the flame blades on your bar, and your mirror images will attack with the flame blades and deal damage through the Firebird 6B's bonus. You have to ignite enemies with Disintegrate, so you want to channel the beam usually at all times, because this will also activate the Death Wish effect for 325% damage bonus. And the mirror images will profit from this and attack for you. And every time they hit an enemy that is ignited from the Disintegrate, they will deal a massive burst of damage. And this is where all the potential comes from. So you do rely on those mirror images to deal damage for you, which also means that you have to protect them because they are extremely fragile. In groups, this is usually done from the Z-bar with stuns, and in solo, this is usually done with Frost Nova. The mirror images themselves will also cast Frost Nova, but usually when you have such a solo setup, you will activate mirror images and Frost Nova at the same time, and then they will kind of start a chain reaction of Frost Novas to keep themselves safe. But typically they are very squishy and die in like 1 or 2 hits on most enemies, and you will use the Enforcer gem. With the Enforcer you get 90% damage reduction for your pets, which doesn't really make them tanky yet, but it does help to have them survive another hit or 2. And you also want to focus on a rather large life pool. While the build is usually quite tanky, you want to prioritize a high vitality because of the mirror image HP scaling. They don't really seem to scale with much else. Keeping your mirror images alive and in check are the 2 most important things to succeed with this build. You're usually not really struggling with survivability, but a bit of life per hit on a weapon or bracers, or maybe going with the Templar in solo is definitely a good option. But typically you have 2 times 80% damage reduction coming from, first of all, the 4-piece bonus when you have combustion stacks, and also the Orb of Infinite Depth, which you generally have in the cube. This is also why you want to have the Explosive Blast chain reaction here, and you essentially numlock this or macro this so that it gets cast at all times. Just with the staff setup, when you don't have Arcane Power on crit on your offhand with the Maxroll's lesson, you have to be a bit careful about the resources, but with a few extra resource rolls, this is very doable. So for example, on the gloves you can roll something like resource cost reduction. You definitely want it on the shoulders. You can go with a topaz, maybe a ring or something. And then there's also the Astral Presence passive, which gives you some extra Arcane Power regen. but you won't really need it. This is just something to be mindful about, but the damage is definitely insane with the staff because of the high base damage and the 300% damage bonus here. When you do speedruns with this build, you will generally go for a rather slow pace but at a very high tier. So when you do this in solo, you can expect something like 3.5 to 4 minutes average clear times, just because the mirror image mechanic makes it quite slow, but you can definitely expect to go with something like GR120 plus quite easily, and once you have ethereals, once you have a good setup, even higher. And in groups you can even go beyond 130 speedruns in like 3.5 to 4 minutes, and again kind of slow pace, but you go several tiers higher than, for example, with Light Monk or Red runs, and you just get more XP that way anyway. You have to be very careful when you encounter very large monster groups, especially in groups. So when there's like more than 20 or 30 targets or so, you don't want to be igniting everything immediately. Having this dot effect from the Firebird's bonus up on many targets will lag out the game, so this is something to be very careful about. And usually you have Disintegrate, Chaos, Nexus, which gives you these little spreading rays to random enemies. But this is something that you might want to avoid, especially in high GRs when you're doing boss killing on GR150, for example. In that case, you can change the rune from Disintegrate to Intensify, which gives you a single beam that you can control and hit exactly the right targets with. And typically you don't want to ignite many targets. When you're doing GR150, you will not really do that much damage most of the time as a Rift Guardian killer, and you will rely on, for example, the Witch Doctor with Spear Barrage or the Necro with Scythe to actually kill most of the trash monsters for you. And once the pool has been thinned out a little bit and there's only like some elites left, maybe like 10 trash monsters, 15 or something like that, you can also start blasting and do your fire convention cycles. In general, almost every single variation of this build will play around the convention of elements plus the endless walk combo, so you typically want to stand still a lot, but you don't really get moving anyway because you just teleport around, which keeps endless walk at 100% at all times. But you want to play around convention of elements, especially on the high tiers and for solo pushing. There are some setups that use focus and restraint and the Squirt's necklace, especially in 4-man speedruns, and also in solo speedruns you can attempt to do this. For example, when you also choose the dominance passive that gives you extra shields when you kill enemies, and this will ensure the good Squirt's uptime even when you don't have protection from other supports. You combine this with magic weapon deflection and also the galvanizing ward, and this will give you insane shielding to the point where typically you will never drop your Squirt's necklace at some point anymore, especially in groups. Some other really important passes are Audacity, 30% multiplicative damage boost against close enemies, and also Evocation, 20% cooldown reduction, which helps us to scale Captain Crimson's damage bonus and allows us to cast mirror images more often. In general, you don't really need a lot of cooldown on this build, but stacking it is definitely recommended on a few pieces, like the helm with the diamond and the shoulders with the cooldown reduction roll, because that is kind of like easy to get. And then you can also add another 1 or 2 rolls, but you don't really have to. As long as you're like at around 50% cooldown reduction or something like that, you're usually fine, and a bit more is a bit helpful but not required. In the armor cube there's an option between Mantle of Channeling and Tasker and Theo. So what you need to know about this is that whenever you are even slightly struggling with survivability or Squirt's uptime, you will take Mantle of Channeling for the 25% damage reduction. The offensive value of those two items is very similar. Tasker and Theo has theoretically a tiny bit more value, like a few percent DPS, but the 25% toughness is huge for Mantle of Channeling. And whenever you feel you need a bit more toughness, then this is the way to go. This only changes when you play a Rift Guardian killer setup where you have Hydra. In those cases you can include Hydra with no rune, because this one also procs the 6-piece Firebirds for you when it attacks, and this is usually what's used for Rift Guardian killer setups. In some cases even combined with a Serpent Sparker for double Hydra. And here you definitely want to go Tasker and Theo and go for the right breakpoint, because this will ensure even higher DPS. But for the mirror images, the two items are extremely close. For your gems, the number 1 gem that is always included is Bane of the Trapped. In solo, you typically also always have Enforcer in your setups. Unless you're speed farming, you can experiment to go without it, but in pushing, this is definitely the way to go because of the damage reduction for your images. They don't actually deal more damage, they just stay alive better, but this is very valuable and you do a lot more damage because they actually get to attack and not die immediately. In groups, you usually the Rift Guardian Killer in high tiers, so you want to go with Bane of the Stricken. And also in groups, Taeguk doesn't have great value. So Zaze is usually a better replacement because you don't have to stack it up and you don't have to drop it every so often. So even when you're staying at a rather close range most of the time, this is typically the better choice compared to Taeguk, which you mostly want to use in solo, because in groups you have the ZH giving you massive additive damage buffs and devaluing the Taeguk gem, which is the same category. Zaze is multiplicative, and this is why it's usually a better choice. In some cases, like playing a Rift Guardian Killer, you actually use the Zaze to its maximum potential, and instead of Audacity you have Power Hungry. So when you fight the boss, you will have probably the Barb stunning the boss when it's time for your damage rotation on the Fire Convention, and you teleport away after summoning your mirror images, so that you get the Zaze and the Power Hungry effect for massive damage bonuses. It's worth mentioning that there's also some other variations of Firebirds that you can play, but they're all weaker than mirror images. So you don't have to play with mirror images, it's still a good set without it, but it will definitely be up to 5 or even more tiers weaker if you don't have mirror images. So the best version is a Spectral Blade, like manual Flame Blade variation without the mirror images. Here you can get something like Black Hole, and you can attack yourself with very high attack speed with Shame of Desire and the Fragment of Destiny, and you essentially do what the mirror images do, just yourself, but you lose the Deathwish multiplier. There are also some other variations, for example Meteors, but for the most part the solo speeds, solo push and format speeds are probably the most important variations here. And of course for high GRs, if you want to go all the way to GR150, the Rift Guardian Killer. So go check out the setups here. They are all very similar with a few variations. Usually you always have the Orgul set in there, usually you always have the Crimson set in there, and those sets give you very nice offensive and defensive buffs. And you can also craft essentially like 1/3 of the gear just from the blacksmith, which is very nice. If you intend to play Firebirds in T16 and in bounties, which I absolutely do not recommend, you should be playing a Typhon Wizard. But if you want to have a setup similar to this with Ransler's Folly and Edge Sigil. This will pull in enemies to you and speed up the runs quite a bit, but it's still not really great. So you should look for a better build. I have a guide for this specifically. If you want to check it out, check in the description. And that's also about it for this guide. So hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're gonna have a lot of fun with the Firebirds Wizards. Maybe you want to push 150 solo next season if you go all the way to at least 2.5 or 3k Paragons. This is kind of the threshold where it becomes possible. So good luck with that in case you go for it. And just in general, it's gonna be an extremely strong build all around for any activity, especially in format speeds and also in high form min. So I wish you good luck with that. Hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys next time.